Those who believe in the Lotus Sutra are as if in winter, which never fails to turn into spring. Never have I seen or heard of winter turning into autumn, nor have I ever heard of any believer in the Lotus Sutra who remained a common mortal. A passage from the sutra reads, "Among those who hear of this law, there is not one who shall not attain Buddhahood." Your husband gave his life for the Lotus Sutra. His entire livelihood depended on a small fief, and that was confiscated because of his faith. Surely that equaled giving his life for the Lotus Sutra. Sethan Joji offered his life for but half a stanza of Buddha's teaching, and Bodhisattva Yakyo burned his elbows in offering to the Buddha. They were both saints, so they could endure these austerities as easily as water pours on fire. But your husband was a common mortal, so he was at the mercy of his suffering, like paper placed in fire. Therefore, he will certainly receive blessing as great as theirs. He may be watching his wife and children in the mirrors of the sun and moon every mere moment of the day and night. Since you and your children are common mortals, you cannot see or hear him. But neither can the deaf hear thunder, nor the blind see the sun. But do not doubt that he is close at hand protecting you. Just when I was thinking that if at all possible I must somehow go and see you, you had a rope sent here to me. Your thoughtfulness was totally unexpected. Since the Lotus Sutra is the noblest of all sutras, I may yet gain influence in this lifetime. If so, rest assured that I will watch over your children whether you are living then or not. While I was in Sado and during my stay here, you sent your servant to help me. Neither in this nor future lifetime shall I ever forget what you have done for me. I will not fail to repay my debt of gratitude to you. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, with my deep respect, Nichiren.
Thank you very much. So I would like just for a moment with you to consider this wonderful title. It's an expression we often use this very day when we're encouraging people. If someone's a bit down, we say to them, don't we, winter always turns into spring. Nichiren Daishonin said those who believe in the Lotus Sutra are as if in winter, which never fails to turn into spring. And then add to his sense of humor, never have I seen or heard of winter turning into autumn. In other words, when we're facing and challenging and changing any aspect of our unhappy karma, it seems sometimes like winter, doesn't it? But inevitably, if we go on practicing, it always turns into spring. We find in the end that we change whatever that particular form of suffering is. So on the Gosho, as you may know, there are two Sanskrit characters, all the rest are Chinese characters. And on the Gosho, there are two Sanskrit characters. They look like sort of pin men with a little bald head and a long body. You know the ones I mean? Well, if you look at the Gosho, and you're looking at the Gosho, the one on the left means Mono Soku Bodai. Mono Soku Bodai means transforming desires into enlightenment. Soku, that word Soku, means equals, or is the same as. Mono Soku Bodai. Mono is desires. Soku means like equals or are the same as Bodai, which is enlightenment. And then, on the other side, on the right-hand side, is the character meaning Shoji Soku Neha. Shoji Soku Neha. That means transforming sufferings into nirvana. Sufferings into nirvana. So, sufferings, of course, are fundamentally those sufferings which Shakyamuni faced so long ago, more than 3,000 years ago now. That is to say, to be born into a trouble-filled world. And secondly, to have to grow old. Nirvana literally means blown out, like a candle, blown out. That's what nirvana literally means. But in the deeper sense, nirvana is the term used for enlightenment. However, it used not to be understood that way in Hinayana Buddhism, in the earlier and rather more simple teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. Nirvana was thought to mean the end of the cycle of birth and death, right? Your life was snuffed out so far as its appearances and disappearances in lifetime after lifetime in this world, and you were in a state of sort of permanent bliss or suspended animation. However, Mahayana Buddhism, as it was taught, as its teachings developed and progressed, began to realize that it wasn't so simple as all that, and that nirvana didn't mean that you made a sort of exit from this cycle of birth and death into this world, but that it was an awakening, if you like, or an enlightenment to the true nature of life, to the meaning of life and death, a total and complete understanding of life, which meant that you could live in this world as a Buddha of absolute freedom, that is to say, no longer hemmed in by the doubts and fears and all the rest of it that cause us often to dislike living in this world. In other words, it was a release from all bonds and chains of one's ignorance and misunderstandings and illusions. In other words, it was attaining Buddhahood or enlightenment in this very world. So that is, as Mahayana Buddhism understands that word nirvana. It's not, nirvana does not mean, when it's mentioned by Nichiren Daishonin, something that happens in an afterlife, but a state of enlightenment which can be reached in this very world. So as you know, down the center of the Causton, between those two characters, turning desires into enlightenment and transforming sufferings into nirvana, is Nagamyo Renge-kyo Nichiren, in real, great, fantastic, bold characters. In other words, all the other characters, including those two that I mentioned, are, if you like, bathed in the light of Nagamyo Renge-kyo. So Nagamyo Renge-kyo is the power of life which can renew or transform desires into enlightenment and sufferings into nirvana. In other words, negative can be transformed through the power of Nagamyo Renge-kyo into positive. Evil can be transformed into good. King Ajatashatru, who is mentioned in this particular Gosho, was unfortunately obsessed by evil. He had a bad friend in Devadatta. Devadatta, who was extremely jealous of Shakyamuni Buddha, and at one point wanted to kill Shakyamuni Buddha. turn desires into enlightenment, however bad those desires be, may be, however many mistakes we may have made in the past, if you practice as the Buddha's taught, then you can turn anything into an enlightened state. Another way of putting it, you can turn evil into elixir, poison into elixir. So Nam-myoho-renge-kyo has the power innately in it of revival or renewal. And that is centered in the character Myo. Myo is the unseen power, energy of life. You can put it another way and say Myo is the creative life force. Therefore, Myo, if you look around you and you look at nature and all the rest of it, is always an energy which is essentially creative. It can never be negative. It's the natural force of life which creates everything with its incredible energy and power. It's the energy which makes a tree grow. It's the energy which makes us grow. So essentially it is a creative power. Therefore, if we chant Nam-myoho-renge-kyo, we are activating that great energy within our own lives, and through that we can transform or renew ourselves and overcome all sufferings. In other words, the creative energy of life in its very nature is working towards every entity of life, whether it's a tree or an animal or a human being or a star or a cell in one's body. It's working towards that entity of life functioning in the most wonderful and best possible way. So in the case of human beings, of course, the problem is that we have a choice. We have a conscious mind. We can make decisions. So either we can decide to go along with the rhythm of life, the creative power of life, or we can decide to go the other way, often even out of ignorance. We don't know that such a force exists, and therefore we take no notice of it and do nothing in order to create the best possible life that we can by using that force. This Buddhism is all about using that force, isn't it, for ourselves, activating it within our own lives and bringing out our fullest potential so that we can make the most incredible contribution to life as a whole. So no matter what problem or suffering, we can overcome it. Anything that is standing in the way, in other words, of us being a totally fulfilled human being using all our abilities and potential. Because that is what the creative energy of life is trying to make us do. But unfortunately we create our own blockages and things which hinder it. So in other words too, in Mission Daishonin's Buddhism, there is no such thing as stalemate. There is no such thing as deadlock. There is absolutely no such thing. If we galvanize the great power of Nam-myoho-renge-kyo, the power of life force, which exists in us all in inexhaustible supplies, if we know how to tap it, how to unlock the door to it, really. We may think there is such a thing as a stalemate or a deadlock, because we may chant and chant and chant and nothing seems to be happening. Chanting is bringing about a whole lot of causes and effects. We think nothing is happening, but under the surface of our lives, something is happening. The moment we chant, actually our life is moving. chant to do. Provided, of course, that is for one's happiness. It's not going to work for others. So, no matter what problem, you cannot have deadlock. So if any of you think you're in a deadlock, you just keep going. And you definitely break through. Because no one has ever, if they did that, found that they couldn't break through. We always do. So sometimes, in my own experience, everything seemed to be so desperate. Nothing seemed to be changing. But somehow, when you continued to practice, I often used to think it was like a sort of golden road. You had nothing else was going right in your whole life, and you just held onto this road, knowing that it was going to pull you forward to something better and overcome whatever it was that was blocking. And this always happened. So of course, that is faith. Faith is the action of continuing to practice, no matter what. Hanging on to that golden road, like grim death, and continue, keeping going. That is faith in Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism. But in another Gosho, which Nichiren Daishonin wrote to the same lady, Myoichiyama, he said this: as a woman cherishes her husband, as a man will give his life for his wife, as parents will not abandon their children, or as a child refuses to leave his mother, so should we put our trust in the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni, Tahoe, and all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, as well as the heavenly gods and benevolent deities, and chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This is what is meant by faith. So of course, we encourage each other that way. That's really one of the most important reasons for the existence of an organization that puts us into whatever we like to call it, districts or groups or whatever, so that we can encourage each other. Because sometimes it's tough going, isn't it? And everything seems to be going wrong around your ears. Nothing seems to be going right, nothing moving, still in the same old mess, still in the same old trouble. We need people there to encourage and keep us going. Gradually, it became apparent that my way of looking at problems or difficulties that we encountered in the normal course of business was very different to the way my partners looked at it. Actually, one of the partners was the sleeping partner, so it was really only one partner who gradually I realized was getting upset because whenever we discussed anything, I seemed to have a different view to his. Of course, I was chanting, practicing Buddhism, and he couldn't bring himself to do so until in the end I realized he didn't like the fact that I chanted and practiced Buddhism very much at all. He was younger than me, and he was by nature rather a pessimistic chap. And always he was in personal debt in one way or another. He used to juggle with his credit cards. And he was always in a panic about his financial situation. Probably this upset him and made him excitable. Anyway, gradually he became furious with me because I guess I was quite calm when there was a crisis. But on top of his personal debt, if the business was having a crisis, he really got into the most fearful state. And life became very difficult for me. In fact, it became absolute hell because he became quite open about his dislike of me and the fact that I practiced Buddhism. And added to that, we were always, of course, in difficult difficulties with this new company. All new companies have difficulties. Very few of them go easily. So what made him even more angry, upset, was that, and I'm not talking big-headedly here, because it was the Causton, but usually when I insisted what I thought he was suggesting really wasn't the wisest way, and in the end won the battle, and we went the way I suggested, we always seemed to win, and when he ignored what I was saying, we usually lost. So this made him even more upset with me. And in the end, by some means, I had to go away on a business trip for a few days, and when I came back, I found that by some means he got someone else into my office, which was quite close to his, and had set up an office for me at the back of a warehouse thick with dust. And I thought I was exiled. Actually, looking back in later, I sort of laughed to myself, because I think it was rather like being exiled to Sado Island, only nowhere near as bad. It was filthy, dirty, and dusty, and quite horrible. And I felt in despair. For me, my pride, my stupid pride was affected, because I'd always had good jobs in quite big offices. It wasn't until I came to LSK really that I had small offices. But I had always big offices, big jobs, good salaries. I'd never gone through this at all. Managed that the company was losing money, and I wasn't able to draw anything out of it. Mexico and I were becoming very, very poor. We often called it the age of the sausage, because the only food that Mexico felt she could afford to buy was sausages. And mind you, I was leader of LSK at this time too. So this situation went on. Oh, it seemed endlessly. It never changed. There was I in my dusty warehouse. There was the company not progressing very well. There was I too not able to take anything out of the company to keep us going, and in a real bad way. I tried to sell my car, but I couldn't. I tried again till the sweat was pouring off me at one stage because we were so poor, to sell my car, and I made up my mind, okay, I'll just have to walk everywhere or take a terrible bus when I can afford it, to get to activities. But of course, thank goodness, Gosho wouldn't let me sell my car. Sometimes, of course, I was desperate. But there you are. That was it. And it was through that period that I really felt sometimes that I was hanging on to this road. There was nothing else to hang on to. Everything seemed to be falling about my ears. This was in about my fifth year of practice. Of course, not everyone has to go through this. But I realize now that I jolly well had to go through it. And the worst time came when one evening, poor Mitsuko, my wife, who had been struggling with no money to feed us and so on, her little nerve broke, and she felt she got to do something. I think she was so desperate, and she turned on me and said, "It's all your fault," and really attacked me. She doesn't mind me telling this story now, because it was my great moment. She did this, and I thought, oh my God, if Mitsuko turns on me, that's just the end of everything. But to my amazement, the next second, this feeling came out of my life. No matter what, okay, if Mitsuko turns against me, she turns against me. I don't care if I'm naked, I don't care if I'm in rags, but I'll never give up the goals. It took me by surprise. Just came out of my life so strongly. And that actually was the turning point. From that time onwards, when I sort of gave my life to the goals, that was the turning point. And from then on, or we began to build our life steadily, step by step by step again. So of course when we look back Like many men, of course, I had that pride. And out of my life went all those things which would otherwise have been a barrier, for instance, to me understanding what our young people, and in that manner, some of the older people go through when they're in a state of no work, out of work and so on. I would have found it very difficult to relate to such people without that experience. Added to that, I realized that I had always been careless with money too. This really made me appreciate the value of money and the need to use money, but to use it wisely. Oh, and so many other things. I learned, and Mitsuko learned out of that experience. There wasn't one moment wasted. But it was tough at the time. But of course, once you come through the other end and you realize just what you've gained from it, then the whole thing seems to be worthwhile. I treasure that experience now. It was one of the great experiences of my whole life. But when you're in the midst of it, it's not so easy. So maybe some of you feel you're in the midst of something rather similar. Wouldn't be the same exactly, but then you're in the midst of desolate, desperate situation. All I can say is just hang on to the road. It's no good letting go. That'll make it worse. Just hang on to the road, and in the end you'll be pulled through. So of course, I went through probably what many of you went through. For a time I was saying and chanting, what was wrong? Was it because my faith wasn't strong enough that I was going through all this? Or was it because I was practicing incorrectly? Or what was it that I kept on trying to discover was some failing on my part? And I went through all that, and I couldn't see that I was doing anything wrong. I was doing lots of activities. I was doing my Romeo and Everything seemed to be okay. And of course it was. This was my unhappy karma. This had to happen. If it had happened now, when I'm 68 years old, I shouldn't have enjoyed it anywhere near as much. It would have been even more awful. But it happened then. It was the right, perfect time for it, of course. And through that, we changed that. And since we climbed back after that event, I honestly promise you I've never had to worry about money. We're certainly not in any way rich. And, but somehow, enough is always there for our needs. I remember Mr. Toda at some point said, when I say I remember, not Mr. Toda, but I read it in a book, he said, I feel now, and as you know, he went through terrible difficulties with his business and so on, and he said, I feel now as if I'm floating on a cloud, because anything I need for my personal happiness and my family's happiness is just as if I only had to put out a hand, and there it is. Well, I'm not sure that I feel that I'm floating on a cloud. Not yet anyway. I've still got more to go yet. But I certainly do find that I don't have to want. And somehow the money is always there when it's needed. So winter always turns into spring. I really understood that from then onwards. And we must just keep going. As you know, there's another famous phrase in the Gosho about going walking from Kamakura to Kyoto to see the beautiful moon over the capital city of Kyoto. And if you stop, it takes 12 days, and you stop on the 11th, you're destroying all your aims. So we must never stop on the 11th day. My experience, I realize now, that it's when things get to their worst, it is the time you must go on. Because that actually is the point of breakthrough. When the negative force of life has really got you against without faith, because you have committed countless offences and accumulated much evil karma in the past, you must expect to suffer retribution for everything you have done. So because we practice this Buddhism, we turn heavy karma into light. Looking back at it, that experience, it was tough at the time, but in a way, it wasn't desperate suffering. It wasn't like being in a concentration camp, for example, in World War II. Nothing like that. It was difficult, and it was an incredible struggle. It was terrible. But what may I have done in my eternal lifetimes? How much slander, how much hurt may I have committed and caused other people in all those billions and millions and years of lifetimes? We've worked on it, because the 9 worlds, which have a negative side to them, exist in us as human beings. Therefore, we have all committed pain to others, slander, difficulty. That's got to come out. Then our life is purified. And the cause, in terms of cause and effect, the cause to win that battle is to keep going. The cause is the Nam-myoho-renge-kyo that you chant each day. In terms of effect, it's because of you keep going, making that cause, that you eventually win. There can be no doubt about that at all. And even Nichiren Daishonin said, some of these grave offences I have already paid for, but some I still have to pay for. Because he showed us in his lifetime that he too had karma, bad karma, unhappy karma. He fought his way through. And as you know, there's the other famous saying, that when iron is heated, in order to make a fine sword, it has to be beaten many times in order to get out the flaws in the metal. In our lives, he said, it's just the same. Beaten, not just once, but many times, to get the flaws out. Then you're left with a piece of pure and perfect steel, so strong that nothing on this earth can break it or harm it. So I don't know. Hands out who feels they're in the middle of a difficult deadlock crisis. Congratulations. It's difficult, don't worry, you just keep going. Really, hold on like grim death to the practice. So definitely the Causton is protecting you. That's the other thing I realized. That although we were down to sausages so far as our menu was concerned, we never actually starved. Although it was difficult for me to pay for my shoes to be repaired, still there I was capable of going out in them, though they had a hole or two at the bottom and so on. The Causton protected us all the time, and eventually we broke through. So I'd like if you could just read that with little bit. It's the second paragraph. We'll just read it once again in light of what I said.
At the end of his life, the Lord Buddha lamented, "Now I am about to enter Nirvana. The only thing troubling my heart is King Ajatasattu." Bodhisattva Kashyapa then asked him, "Since the Buddha's mercy is impartial, your regret in dying should stem from compassion for all mankind. Why do you single out King Ajatasattu?" The Buddha replied, "Suppose that a couple have 7 children, one of whom falls ill. Although the parents love all their children equally, they worry most about the sick child."
That's the Causton. The Causton always watch over you, even though you're in difficulties. And the whole purpose, remember, it goes back to what I said about the creative force of life. The creative force of life is what is creating that situation. The more I practice, the more I realize that everything that happens to one when you chant Namyo is actually positive. We may think sometimes it's extraordinarily negative, but in fact it's positive. Out of that happening, we gain in the end so much, though it seems so awful at the time. That is turning poison into elixir. So, although, as this passage said, King Gosho was going through it, the Buddha never ceased worrying about it. Causton never ceases, that creative force of life never ceases to work as long as we keep it flowing through our lives. In the end we'll come through and be that much more valuable person for the world and to create happiness both within ourselves and others, isn't it? So, Nichiren Daishonin taught us the spirit, really, in that instant when he was taken by an escort of 250 samurai, dramatic scene in 1271, when they took him to the beach of Tatsumakuchi to behead him. And on the way down, you remember, he stopped by a shrine. He said to the soldiers, please let me stop here for a moment. I have something to do. And he prayed at this shrine. But he prayed out loud. Loudly, sternly, and strongly. Remember what he said was, those of you who read on the Buddha's behavior, what he said really was, in so many words, what do you think you're doing to all the Buddhist gods and the Shoten Zenjin and the forces of the universe? Are you going to do nothing to get me out of this situation, he said? Without a doubt, if you do nothing, you will fall into the hell of incessant suffering for the rest of your eternal lifetime. And so on. He remonstrated with the Buddhist gods. And then, as you know, having strongly told them to do something about the situations he was in, they took him on down to the beach, and literally, as the Japanese history books say, Roman with swords above his head, ready to come down. This extraordinary comet or whatever it was, shot across the sky. And the soldiers, of course, in those medieval times, very superstitious, and they ran, terrified. And they thought, this man is like a god. And they refused to chop off his head. And he lived to die a natural death. But he showed by that, firstly, of course, that he was one with the universe, that he was in rhythm with the universe itself, in that his life was taken to be beheaded, but at that moment in the rhythm of life, this comet shot across the sky and terrified the soldier. But secondly, he did it for us. Why he stopped at that shrine and prayed to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Buddhist gods in the universe that they've got to do something to get him out of this situation, because he hadn't finished his mission by then. He hadn't inscribed the dialogues. He had to live. So he challenged them in that way. That is what prayer to this Causton should be like. Not, oh, please, get me out of this. Save me, save me. We're not praying to some force outside of us. What we're praying for is that power that we're out in our life. And through the principle of Esho Fumi, the inseparability of what's around us and ourselves, the environment reacts accordingly. It's from within ourselves that we're doing it. So, since I started 3 times, I felt I was on the march down to Tatsunokuchi Beach. I wasn't surrounded by 250 samurai, but I was surrounded by 250 problems. But, I remember that amazing, because I've always been moved by those passages, on the Buddha's beheading. You must read them if you haven't. They're so dramatic. And I remember those, and I found myself doing the same thing, really not pleading to the Buddhist God, saying you've got to do something by tomorrow. I've got to have all the wisdom and everything working and we've got to do. That is what prayer is about in this Buddhism. When you're trying to calm chanting up. That is why sometimes you hear senseis talked about sweating in front of the gods. Really hard. Utterly. So please remember that. If you feel you're in a jam, or in a tense situation, or a deadlock, please remember it's the way Nichiren Daishonin and pray on the way down to Tatsunokuchi. Do the same thing. That's really what this Buddhism is all about. Then you can defeat anything. So let's go on now and return to Yoichiyama. I just want to take one other passage, which is in fact the second paragraph from the end. Second paragraph from the end. Starting, your husband gave his life for the Lotus Sutra.
Your husband gave his life for the Lotus Sutra. His entire livelihood depended on a small faith, and that was confiscated because of his faith. Surely that equaled giving his life for the Lotus Sutra. Sendoji offered his life for but half a stanza of a Buddhist teaching, and Bodhisattva Yakyo burnt his elbows in offering to the Buddha. They were both saints, so they could endure these austerities as easily as water pours on fire. But your husband was a common mortal, so he was at the mercy of his sufferings, like paper placed in fire. Therefore, he will certainly receive blessing as great as theirs. He may be watching his wife and children in the mirrors of the sun and the moon every moment of the day and night. Since you and your children are common mortals, you cannot see or hear him. But neither can the deaf hear thunder, nor the blind see the sun. But do not doubt that he is close at hand protecting you.
It's a beautiful paragraph there, but also really beautiful. Thank you. Because I think it wouldn't have been as good if it had been read by a man. Because he was talking to this lady, and somehow, when you were reading it, one could really feel Nichiren Daishonin's concern about her in the difficult situation she was in. Very beautiful, I think. Incredible. And, we can sort of feel just be reading that, how Nichiren Daishonin knew she was a very frail person. And that she suffered quite a lot from losing her husband. And probably she relied so much on him. And there she was left without him, with this sick son and a young daughter. And at the same time, though she was like that, frail, she'd done amazing things. When she's in the midst of this situation, she'd sent her own servant off to Sado Island to look after Nichiren Daishonin while he was in exile. That was a wonderful thing to do. She never forgot it. That was really her contribution. In the spirit of contribution, she sent her servant to Sado Island. And of course, just as an example of how, in terms of cause and effect, the spirit of contribution, if you let it flow from your life, will always receive its effect in terms of great benefit for oneself. How great benefit, when Nichiren Daishonin never forgot her. In her lifetime, wrote her many letters. Unbelievable. I'm sure all of us, any of us with difficulties, whatever, we wouldn't mind just being able to go around the corner and see Nichiren understand